Canada was created in 1867, the Constitution was ambiguous about Canada's international relations, and this had huge implications for Canada's relationship with the United States. According to the Constitution, Britain had to be a part of Canada's international diplomacy. So if the country wanted to negotiate a trade agreement or a treaty with the United States, Britain had to be there and Britain had to sign. This was a problem for Canada very early. In 1871, the Canadian government signs the Treaty of Washington, which included some economic provisions related to fisheries. And Canada very immediately realized that Britain didn't always put Canada's interests ahead of its own. So that limitation placed these awkward restrictions on Canada's economic relationship with the United States. Even though the Constitution in 1867 limited Canada's ability to negotiate treaties with the United States, it still gave the Canadian government the ability to protect the Canadian economy through tariffs, which was a big component of the national policy in the late 19th century. The intent of these protective tariffs was to prevent American manufacturers from selling their products in Canada and to allow Canadian manufacturers to develop without having to compete with American manufacturers. One of the consequences of that policy was that American companies set up factories in Canada, branch plants, Gillette, Ford, Coca-Cola. Other big American corporations set up branch plants in Canada to get around that tariff. So while the national policy protected manufacturing in Canada, it also produced one of these unintended outcomes of a branch plant economy emerging in the country in the 20th century. Probably the most significant event that happened in Canada's early history with its trade relationship with the United States was in 1923 when the Canadian government signed the Halibut Treaty. This was the first international treaty that Canada signed independently of Britain, and the Prime Minister insisted that Britain not sign the treaty and not be a part of the negotiations. Now, in the broader scheme of things, it may seem like a treaty about the Pacific halibut fishery isn't all that significant, but it was a huge milestone for Canada's autonomy internationally, and it was a stepping stone towards greater and greater integration of the Canadian and US economies over time. In the interwar period in the 1920s and the 1930s, the Canadian and American economies were already becoming quite enmeshed, but in 1941, through the Hyde Park Agreement, Canada and the United States agreed to economic coordination for the production of war materials for the Second World War. So by the late 1980s, Canada and the United States reached an agreement for free trade called the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. This was the subject of the 1988 federal election, and the agreement went into effect in 1989.
Il ne faut pas s'étonner, lorsqu'on parlait d'un libre-échange entre le Canada et les États-Unis, que des Canadiens s'y opposent. Ça a été le cas en 1911, ça a été le cas Mackenzie King qui avait songé à un traité de libre-échange après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, mais il abandonne l'idée à cause des craintes des nationalistes. Et bien entendu, on a eu le grand débat sur le libre-échange dans les années 80, en 1988, mais il ne faut pas perdre de vue qu'il y avait vraiment une coalition d'individus, de groupes qui vont s'opposer au libre-échange. Vous avez d'abord, bien entendu, des nationalistes. Il y a eu bien entendu des travailleurs, des travailleuses qui se sont opposés, des syndicats qui se sont opposés en disant le libre-échange, ça signifie tout simplement le nivellement vers le bas. Et pour d'autres, le libre-échange, eh bien, ça allait à l'encontre de leur conviction, c'est-à-dire qu'il ne fallait pas favoriser une libéralisation des échanges. Au contraire, il est important de garder une manière ou des politiques favorables à la protection d'emploi. Et aujourd'hui, en 2017, très peu de gens vont dire « abandonnons le libre-échange ». Aujourd'hui, les gens sont favorables au libre-échange, en partie en réaction à Donald Trump et ses politiques Buy America ou n'achetons que des produits américains, faits par des Américains.